Genshin Impact is a massive video game, and that goes for its story too. At this point there's almost 6 years of main quests, character quests, and world quests to experience. So you'd think that all the important stuff would probably be hidden in the game itself. But apparently that's not entirely true, because from what I've been told, some pretty major Genshin lore is actually hiding in the manga. Hi. My name is Chris. I'm a relative newcomer to the world of Genshin Impact, and today I'm going to find out if the Genshin Impact manga is really as important as people keep telling me it is. So join me as I dive into each chapter, breaking down the story, characters, and lore implications as we go. Let's get started. The story of the prologue opens up with Vanessa, which is actually a name we've heard before, I think, from our journey with Venti back in Mondstadt. Speaking of Venti, he's here too. In fact, this story takes place a long time after he initially founded the city of Mondstadt, as he reawakens thousands of years later out in the wilderness. During the prologue, Venti slowly realizes that Mondstadt is no longer the same free, carefree, joyful nation that he left behind back in the day. Instead, it has become a city ruled by nobles, who use and abuse the common people, making it the polar opposite of the vision Barbados had for his nation back then. Venti eventually gets in trouble with the nobles because, well, he's Venti. More specifically, he heads to a festival that was once about celebrating freedom and joy for the people, but is now more about the son of the ruler of Mondstadt, Lord Lawrence, getting some anime poon by picking up a commoner of his choosing. This part in particular gave me some tonal whiplash. I mean, just look at this panel. It's heavily implied here that the dude does not have good intentions with the girl he chooses, implying in Genshin Impact. Now that I think about it, we actually did see implications like this before back in Liyue, where we, on our hunt for the perfect perfume, who could forget about that questline, hear about some lusty sailors coming to port every now and then. The manga in particular does not seem to stray away from darker subject matter, and while that does surprise me quite a bit, I actually do enjoy that aspect of it. It makes the world of Genshin feel just a bit more dark, without treading into absolute Game of Thrones dark fantasy territory. Anyway, Venti luckily decides to spoil the fun of this creep by catching a ceremonial ball right in front of him, and by fat-shaming him quite a bit, which understandably sends the young Lord Lawrence into quite a fury. Venti makes his escape from the guards and runs into the brick wall that is Vanessa, who single-handedly helps fend off Lord Lawrence and his men, which is even more impressive due to Vanessa's standing. You see, Vanessa is not just a commoner. She's actually a slave of the Muratan people, which is not a culture we've heard about before. Venti calls them the flame-touched people of Muratan, a proud and hot-tempered people that all seems to be blessed with red hair. Vanessa in particular is known as the Lion's Tooth, as she's never been bested in the fabled arena, where slaves fight for their master's entertainment. And so, she scares off Lord Lawrence while Venti hides like a little bitch. But she doesn't get away that easily, unfortunately, because Lord Lawrence returns, having begged his filthy rich father to buy up Vanessa and her entire clan. And so, he throws her in the dungeon. Venti comes to the rescue while continuing his absolute roast of Lawrence. And here we get a bit more lore about the Muratan people. Apparently, back in Venti's heyday, they lived on the volcanic slopes to the west. They were the children of Murata, the Lady of Fire and the Lady of War, celebrated by her people with rites of combat. But now, Vanessa doesn't even seem to recognize her own lineage or the word Muratan. All she remembers is walking endlessly in a sea of grass for generations, while having little to nothing to eat. As a result, the Muratan clan nowadays only knows combat. Vanessa's tale also introduces a new dragon called Ursa, who starved Vanessa's people for days and is now terrorizing the city of Mondstadt. Yeah, Mondstadt doesn't really jive with dragons, apparently. Anyway, Vanessa and Venti become friends, and now shit starts getting real interesting. As Vanessa recalls hearing about Celestia, the realm of the gods, from her elders, she asks her new friend Venti to spill the deets, and he immediately switches the topic with an ominous look and some dark silhouettes in the background, implying that Celestia is definitely not all it's made up to be. Man, I hope we learn more about it at some point in the manga. Venti tries to convince Vanessa to escape with him, but she refuses, as escaping would probably only make things worse for her and her people. Instead, she aims to win 12 straight battles in the arena, which will apparently win her back her freedom. Here we see Venti's slightly idealistic and naive approach to freedom clash with the reality of Mondstadt's current situation, as Vanessa speaks this banger quote: "Freedom given freely is only a guise for another shackle." I honestly love these two characters together as they provide such a stark contrast to each other. Anyway, Venti gives in and leaves Vanessa alone, smirking as he goes. The day of the final trial arrives. And whoop-de-doo, what do you know? Turns out the dingleberry of a noble had no intention of playing fair. Shocker. Not only has he brought in all of Vanessa's clan to the battle, leaving her to constantly worry about protecting them in the fight, he also has to face her final foe in the form of Ursa the Dragon, who it seems the nobles have made some sort of deal with, offering up Vanessa's clan as a means of sacrifice. The odds are truly stacked against our red-haired heroine here. In fact, Lord Lawrence is so confident in his victory that he promises the keys to the city to Vanessa in case she manages to snag the win. Seeing her people die not only from the dragon but also from Lord Lawrence's soldiers, Vanessa goes full anime rage here in an attempt to save her clan. And that's when it happens. Venti appears, this time dressed in his god regalia, imbuing Vanessa's blade with the power of Animo, and forcing the dragon to retreat with his ancient tongue. After that's done, he of course reminds Lord Lawrence to hand over the keys, and so peace, and more importantly, freedom, is returned to Mondstadt. In the aftermath, there's an interesting mention of the first wars in Venti's inner monologue. Could that be referring to the times when the gods were fighting amongst themselves? If that's the case, that would have to be thousands and thousands of years before the events of the game itself. Anyway, we also get to learn the origins of the Knights of Favonius here, as Vanessa was apparently the one who founded it and became the very first Grandmaster. After her work is done, she ascends to Celestia, becoming the fabled Falcon of the West that we heard about during the Mondstadt Archon quest, who still watches over Mondstadt to this day. Before heading in, we see Vanessa asking Venti whether ascending to Celestia makes you a god or not, which makes him do this sad face, and give a somewhat ominous answer in return. It seems others that have ascended has had their body parts, blood, and organs used by the gods to create features of the world such as clouds, rivers, and seas. He also uses the phrase "in other distant worlds" here, which makes me wonder if he's actually just talking about ancient times long past, or if he really means other worlds, as in other worlds that perhaps the Traveler has been to as well. Speaking of the Traveler, the final shot here shows him and Venti hanging out. But is this the Traveler we know and play as? This could very well be our sibling, or is this from some other time period when the Traveler woke up before speaking to Paimon? So many theories, so little panel. Anyway, that marks the end of the prologue, and I gotta say, I'm impressed so far. We've gotten a lot of lore about Mondstadt and the world of Teyvat already. Hopefully this keeps up in Chapter 1. Took off my headset. Chapter 1 brings us a lot closer to the version of Teyvat we know from the game. After the prologue's ancient history vibe, this chapter drops us back into something much more familiar. Mondstadt's politics, Fatui schemes, and people smiling politely while clearly plotting something behind each other's backs. So yeah, we're back in Genshin. The Fatui are here, causing problems as always, and we're introduced to a whole suite of familiar faces from the game. Most importantly, of course, Master Diluc. And naturally, my first thought by seeing Diluc here is, do we finally get to learn what happened between him and Kaya? Because if so, this manga is going in S tier. Anyway, the chapter opens up with this absolute maniac of a man, Il Dottore, running out of bodies to experiment on. So he and his henchmen decide to head to Mondstadt to search for more. Cut to Dawn Winery, where a fancy party is going on and Diluc himself is giving a speech, putting on the polished nobleman act for all his guests, Bruce Wayne style. At this point, I'd say that Diluc is in his Christian Bale era, where he still cares about maintaining public appearances outside of his vigilantism, whereas Game Diluc, on the other hand, feels more like Robert Pattinson Batman, where he doesn't give a shit about keeping up appearances anymore. He is the Dark Knight hero at all times, suit or no suit. Anyway, the party mood is quickly ruined when the Fatui show up. And it's a small thing, but I just want to say here, I really like how the manga handles off-screen speakers. The little mustache cue for this guy is so stupid but effective. I love it. We're properly introduced to Il Dottore this time as one of the 11 Fatui Harbingers, on the same level as Child and La Signora. And apparently he was also the one who defeated Ursa the Dragon a few years earlier, which gives him a pretty nasty bit of leverage on Mondstadt, unfortunately. Dottore wants a meeting with the Seneschal of the Church of Favonius, and then of course Kaya shows up too. From there, the chapter starts laying out the Fatui's angle. They claim they want to recruit young people from Mondstadt into their ranks, devout children no less. And since Mondstadt is apparently the only nation at this point that's not cooperating with them, Mr. Mustache here frames it like teaming up with them is the only sensible option. Which is obviously complete bullshit. Kaya immediately smells something's off, and I really like him in this chapter. The snark comes through just perfectly through the page, and the manga does a really great job of capturing that smug way he always talks. Since openly refusing the Fatui could have consequences, the Mondstadt gang decides to stall instead, with Diluc doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. And during the conversation, the Seneschal lets something quite disturbing slip, that the children the Fatui recruit never seem to come back. We also get a really interesting Diluc detail here, because it seems his father's death is somehow tied into all of this, and that Diluc himself left the Knights of Favonius soon after. Spicy. Back at the party, Il Dottore is clearly not happy with how things are going, and his poor henchman is starting to realize that being employed by this guy is maybe not the safest career option available to him. Kaya shows up and casually directs Mr. Mustache down into the wine cellar as compensation for the inconvenience they caused him. So Mr. Mustache heads downstairs, starts getting handsy with Diluc's wine, and is immediately interrupted by a mysterious masked stranger who stabs his hand with a shuriken-like weapon. Now, I personally don't have a clue who this mysterious masked man with red hair could possibly be. A true mystery. Anyway, the masked GigaChat gets the upper hand rather quickly and starts interrogating Mr. Mustache about Anthony, a baker's son from Mustache who was apparently recruited by the Fatui and never returned. Mr. Mustache is just about to spill the beans when Il Dottore kills him before he can say too much. Dottore also remarks on the vision that the masked stranger is carrying, the same Orphing that we've seen before. Then, just like that, Dottore bails, and with him goes the Fatui's little recruitment proposal. The Seneschal is pleased, though he doesn't really seem to know what just happened. Kaya, on the other hand, very clearly seems to know what Diluc was up to, which would explain why he sent Mr. Mustache to the cellar in the first place. But Diluc plays dumb, and the chapter leaves their relationship in quite the interesting spot. I'm still not really sure if they're on good terms here or not. It doesn't feel as openly hostile as we saw at the end of Diluc's story quest, but there's definitely some kind of unspoken understanding between them. On his way out, Dottore passes Amber and stares a little too hungrily at her vision. Kind of unsettling. The man does a little evil laugh, and that's the chapter. Compared to the prologue, this one is definitely less about the giant lore revelations and more about setting the stage for what's to come. But I actually think it does that pretty well. It gives us an early look at Dottore, starts teasing Diluc's past, shows off the always interesting Kaya-Diluc dynamic, and makes the Fatui feel a lot more disturbing than usual. So even if chapter 1 isn't quite as packed with lore as the prologue, it absolutely feels like the groundwork for something bigger. Let's see if they can deliver on this come chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts by giving me exactly what I wanted more of. We get Kaya's inner thoughts here, and at least on his end, it's made apparent that he still thinks of Diluc as his brother. After all, they're the same type of people in his eyes. Anti-heroes with attitude problems. And just when I finally think that Kaya is now about to spill the beans, we switch over to Amber's POV. Classic. Well, hey, at least Jean is here too, so I can't stay mad for long. Turns out Kaya has been given the questionable honor of escorting the remaining Fatui delegates out of Mondstadt. So he and Jean head out on what is essentially an escort quest. While they're heading out though, a bandaged stranger tries to enter the city. The guards refuse to let her in, thinking that she has the plague, which immediately caught my attention because I don't think we've heard of a plague before in Genshin. So what kind of plague is it? Anyway, Mystery Plague Girl is understandably not thrilled about being turned away. So she responds in her own little funny way, by using some weird mystical power to set the Fatui wagon ablaze, and slipping into the city during the chaos. And this is where things kind of get interesting, because Kaya notes that this does not seem to be vision power. And that kind of threw me a little bit, because up to this point, I'd pretty much assumed that visions were the only way to use supernatural powers like this. Well, apart from weird exceptions like the Traveler, I guess. So immediately introducing this other kind of fire power makes the world suddenly feel a lot less straightforward. The fiery serpent that the girl summons kills 2 Fatui envoys and injures several others, which leaves Kaya and Amber assigned to investigate. But Kaya being Kaya, he would of course rather work alone. Amber tries to tag along, but he shuts that down pretty damn quick. That's got a smart Amber. Kaya then heads down to Dawn Winery, and this is where we start getting some real interesting lore. We get some more of Kaya's inner thoughts here, and we learn that growing up in Diluc's family came with huge expectations, all of which Diluc apparently crushed with ease. He became captain of the Knights of Favonius at age 14. Which is already a bit nuts. But then Kaya just casually drops that after leaving the Knights, he killed his father? Excuse me? This is such a massive reveal to immediately just throw out and then move past. But of course this is Genshin, so let's leave it there for the time being. In case you haven't played Genshin Impact and you're somehow watching this video, typically the way it works in Genshin is that you get one mystery, bombshell drop, and then we just move on right away to something else. Anyway, Kaya questions Diluc about the recent Fyre attack, and there definitely seems to be a little bit of suspicion there. Not enough to accuse Diluc outright, but enough that it feels like Kaya is truly probing Diluc to see what he knows. Diluc, meanwhile, is being his usual cold and standoffish self, all while playing darts. But the second Kaya mentions that the flames at the scene were black, Diluc visibly reacts. What the hell, Diluc? He misses a shot, smashes a vase, and for the first time that I've seen him really, it seems like something has genuinely shaken him here. So whatever these black flames are, they clearly mean something to him. That little moment is probably the most important part of the chapter for me, because it turns this whole thing from some generic flame accident to something deeply personal, it seems. Anyway, Kaya leaves after getting basically nothing useful out of Diluc, and the chapter actually does a good job of showing how strained their relationship already is here. What's interesting though is that the distance seems to be coming a bit more from Diluc than Kaya. I know that was the case in his story quest as well, but it feels kinda different here still. After Kaya leaves, Diluc sits there brooding and thinking. And then we cut back to Amber, who just so happens to run into the bandaged stranger from earlier. Amber interrupts some kind of brooding session from the hooded stranger and appears to immediately regret it. And that's it. That's where the chapter ends. So compared to the first chapter, this one feels less like the political setup and more like the manga turning stuff into a mystery. We're getting drip-fed more and more lore about the Mondstadt cast, but never in a way that fully satisfies your curiosity. As frustrating as that can be sometimes, I hate to admit that it actually works in keeping me invested. Because now I absolutely need to know what happened between Diluc and Kaya, what the deal is with those black flames, and who the bandage girl really is. So yeah, chapter 2 worked for me. Let's see if we continue to eat good in chapter 3. In chapter 3, we get to learn a bit more about the bandage girl. This chapter slows things down just enough to show that there's a lot more going on with her than just her career as a pyromaniac. Sadly, Amber wasn't really heard in the last chapter. I know, what a shame. The moment the bandage girl notices Amber's vision though, she immediately recoils and tries to leave. Clearly, that thing means something to her. But Amber being Amber is not about to let this complete stranger disappear into the night without asking at least 12 follow-up questions. The girl keeps trying to push Amber away, saying that she's one of the unclean ones and that no city will ever open its gates for her. Quite a grim way to describe yourself. We also learn that the bandage girl came to Mondstadt to look for something. Though naturally, this being Genshin and all, we're not about to find out what that is just yet. Amber eventually gets fed up with all the self-loathing evasiveness and calls her out on it in a way that feels extremely Amber. And if I'm being completely honest, it's actually kind of endearing here. Oh god, what's happening to me? Amber is stubborn, blunt, nosy, and way too willing to get involved in other people's problems, but that's also exactly why this scene kind of works. Instead of backing off, Amber offers to help the girl find whatever she's looking for. The two of them head up to the cathedral rooftop, and once again the manga pairs up two very different characters in terms of worldview, and just lets that contrast do the work. I gotta say, I really like that. It makes their conversations feel a lot more meaningful because it's never just about exchanging information, it's about how different people see the same world in entirely different ways. And from up here we learn that the bandage girl's real goal is actually vengeance. But for what? Sweet summer child. But we do finally get a glimpse into her past, and yeah, it's pretty rough. She was cast out of her hometown for being touched by something called the Div. And my guess here is that this was what eventually led her to becoming one of the Torei's subjects, because that would explain both the trauma and the weird fire powers. At some point she loses control of these powers and destroys her own hometown. Kind of a brutal backstory. And this is where the bandage girl actually gets really interesting to me, because the girl talks about all this like she's been cast out by the embrace of the gods, saying that people with visions are chosen, protected, and blessed, while people like her are simply abandoned. I love seeing the relationship between the normal people and the gods being fleshed out like this. It just adds so much to Genshin's world. And this chapter kind of reminds us that if the gods are truly the ones handing out visions, then that also means that some people are just left behind. And as a result, these people might end up deeply resenting the world because of it. Which makes sense. I mean, of course a world built on selective divine favor like this would create bitterness and alienation. After that insightful piece of philosophy, Amber interrupts this by physically grabbing the girl and gliding down towards the city. And for the first time we can actually see the bandaged girl start to soften here, even if only a slight bit. She even asks Amber to burn the clothes she touched, so she won't get infected, which is kinda sad, but also kinda telling for the bandaged girl. She really sees herself as something dangerous, something contaminated. Waiting for them below are Jean and Lisa. And Amber gets what appears to be a light scolding for not actually investigating the Fyre incident as she was supposed to. And with that, the chapter ends. This one is shorter and a bit quieter than the previous chapters, but I actually do think it's doing something really important. It kinda takes the mystery the manga has been building so far and gives it a human face in the shape of the bandaged girl. And asking philosophical questions about the world like this is something I really do like. So I'd say we're headed in a pretty strong direction for this manga. So yeah, that was a shorter chapter, but a very effective one. Hopefully we see more of Lisa in chapter 4. Hello, I am sorry to interrupt your manga viewing experience. I just gotta thank my channel members real quick. They are HopeK96, Richie Reiner, Aiden21408, LSC05, Qya4, Grim23, Roof the RL Panda. Thank you guys so very much for going the extra mile. Also, if you watched this far, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, all that shit. It really helps out. Okay, thank you, bye. Well, looks like Dotorius' poor henchman won't be resting anytime soon. Instead, he's been turned into some kind of mechanically enhanced, mustached monster, ready to go enact his master's revenge. Chapter 4 is interesting for a couple of reasons, even if it's not the most revelation-heavy chapter so far. But we do get some small ones. For one, it turns out this is actually the first proper meeting between Amber, Lisa, and Jean. And honestly, I do kind of like getting that bit of context, because it makes them feel just a little bit more grounded. These relationships didn't just exist fully formed. They had to start somewhere, and here we get to see it in all its slightly awkward glory. And it turns out Jean wasn't really scolding Amber in the last chapter, so much as trying to understand what she had found. So the three of them decide to work together to solve the case, completely unaware that the culprit, or at least someone connected to the whole mess, is standing right there with them. The bandaged girl begs to come along too, hoping that whatever they uncover might give her some clues as to what she's looking for, which, of course, we still do not know what is. But off the group goes towards the library. And before you ask, yes, I did notice that this chamber contains a suspicious amount of full-body Lisa shots. The manga knows what it's doing, I'll give it that. Anyway, one thing I really like here is that Jean and Lisa are very clearly so far ahead of Amber when it comes to the investigation. Amber has the instinct and heart, but Jean and Lisa just feel so much more composed and thorough, and that in turn makes Amber seem a little insecure. Another Amber L. But I do think it works. It gives the group a very nice dynamic right away, because they're clearly not bringing the same things to the table here. Amber is impulsive, Jean is duty-driven, and Lisa feels like the one who always kind of understands more than she's saying. Jean in particular comes through very well in this chapter. She explains that because a Fatui emissary was killed inside the walls of Mondstadt, solving this case is not just about justice, it's a political necessity to secure the relationship between Mondstadt and the Fatui. And that feels very Jean, like we saw this in the game as well. She's not just worried about what happens to the culprit, she's worried about what happens to Mondstadt if they fail. So even though this chapter is a bit quieter than the others, it really does do a nice job of showing just how seriously she takes the responsibility she has. Another interesting thing is Lisa's notes on the Fyre incident. Apparently no one can determine what kind of elemental power was used here, but whatever it is, it's clearly extremely dangerous, because it doesn't just burn randomly, it seems to attach itself to living beings, which is pretty damn horrifying. So the mystery isn't really what or who caused this, because we kinda saw a bandage girl doing that, but more about what kind of mysterious power even is able to do something like this. Amber, naturally, decides that she will run off and try to find the culprit herself. Classic Amber move. Meanwhile, the bandage girl is left to hang out with Jean and Lisa. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, chapter 4 is more of a bridge chapter than a bombshell chapter. but I still think it does a useful job here. It starts building the friendship and group chemistry between the Mondstadt gang, gives Jean some nice characterization, and keeps pushing the mystery forward by making this Black Fyre seem even more mysterious. But at this point I am definitely ready to see the story start to cash in on some of this suspense, so let's see if that happens in Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a lot more action heavy than the chapters before it. And while it doesn't exactly shower us in giant revelations either, it does give Amber a nice chance to carry the story for a while, and prove that she's just slightly more capable than her upbeat energy might suggest. Most of the chapter follows Amber as she searches for Il Dottore, eventually leading her to a hilichurl camp that she has to clear out on her own. Hey, I do that when I play Genshin Impact. Amber apparently didn't think bringing her bow would be necessary, which means she now has to improvise. And to her credit, she actually does a pretty solid job at it. She takes out the hilichurls one by one by using whatever she can get her hands on, whether it be rocks, positioning, or a tactical kick to the face. So even if this chapter is mostly action, I do think it serves a useful purpose, because it shows that Amber isn't just cheerful and impulsive, she's also genuinely resourceful. She knows how to work with the tools that she has, and she knows how to respond quickly when something doesn't go according to plan. Now, I just wish she would do this without internally hyping herself up the entire time and telling herself how great of an outrider she is. God damn it, Amber. Eventually, she spots a Fatui mark in the camp and decides to go investigate it. But before she can get very far, the hilichurls wake back up, and Mr. Mustache shows back up in all his horrifyingly mechanized glory. Jean arrives just in time to save Amber, and that's where the chapter leaves us hanging. Oh, one other thing though, we do also get a very small moment with the bandage girl at the start of the chapter, which shows that she's apparently starting to feel safe enough around Jean and Lisa to actually fall asleep, which might not sound like much, but for someone that appears to be this traumatized and paranoid, it's a nice little detail. So even though most of chapter 5 is focused on Amber fighting through a hilichurl camp, it still quietly keeps that emotional thread hanging in the background. Overall, this chapter though feels less like a big turning point and more like another chapter that builds momentum. It gives Amber some time in the spotlight, keeps the mystery moving just enough, and sets up the coming confrontation with Mr. Mustache without slowing the story down too much. Now, let's see if Mustache Man finally gets what's coming to him in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is where we really start picking up the pace. This is the first chapter in a little while that feels like it's doing a bit of everything at once. We get some solid action, some actual plot progression, and a really important clue tying the whole mystery back into Diluc's past. So yeah, this one's hype. Most of the chapter is spent with Jean and Amber though, trying to take down Mr. Mustache's mechanized form. And surprisingly, Amber ends up doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Once again, the manga gives her another chance to show off how quick-witted and resourceful she is, which I really appreciate. It's not just telling us that Amber is capable, along with herself telling us, I guess. It also keeps finding ways to prove it. As the fight goes on, Jean and Amber notices that Mr. Mustache is very fixated on the Fatui mark. So Amber actually uses that against him, luring him toward a couple of explosive barrels and laying the perfect trap. And on top of that, I think we get one of the first proper elemental reactions that we know from the game, as Amber actually infuses Jean's sword with pyro during the fight, which is a really fun detail. It's one of those little moments that helps the manga feel a bit more connected to the game mechanically, rather than just visually or narratively. And honestly, I've gotta say, the manga is doing so much to strengthen Amber's character so far. I love to see it, but damn, it surprises me. We also get a short flashback here showing what led Jean to chase Amber in the first place. Because back in the library, Lisa and Jean discovers that one of the documents from the burned wagon contains a description of some kind of evil eye. So I guess now the investigation has an actual object, thingamajig, at its center. It seems the Fatui aren't just causing chaos for the sake of it, they're after something specific here. And that's when the really juicy part hits. It turns out that the previous owner of this eye was none other than Diluc's late father, which immediately makes Diluc's reaction earlier to hearing about the black flames make a lot more sense. So whatever happened to his father, it clearly ties into this whole mystery. And that means we'll get that answer in the manga, and I cannot wait to see what it's all about, man. I've been waiting for Diluc backstory for ages now. It elevates the manga so much because it looks like this isn't just some random Venturi operation anymore. It's digging into one of the most important wounds in Diluc's past. Lisa is sent off to investigate Dawn Winery, leaving the bandage girl alone just long enough to sneak away with the description of the eye in hand. But she is quickly discovered by our very own smug boy Kaya, and that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, this one worked really well for me. The action is good, the mystery finally moves forward in a meaningful way, and the story actually starts tying its different threads together instead of just piling on new ones. But this chapter also made me realize that I haven't really talked much about the manga's visuals yet, and honestly, I think they're pretty solid. It's not the most stunning art style I've ever seen or anything, but there is more enough details here in the characters and environment and action scenes to give everything personality. Most importantly, I think it feels distinctly Genshin. And for a manga adaptation like this, what more could you really want? But anyway, chapter 6 is a really nice step up, stronger action, stronger forward momentum, and a much clearer sense that this is all building towards something much bigger. Let's see if that continues in chapter 7. This chapter. Boy, this chapter. This is exactly the kind of chapter that made me want to read the manga in the first place, because here we finally get some genuinely crucial background lore about Mondstadt's resident red-haired Giga Chad. And the best part is, it's not just the kind of lore that makes one character more interesting, this is the kind of backstory that changes how you look at Diluc, at Kaya, at the Knights of Favonius. So yeah, this one really matters. The chapter opens with Lisa putting the squeeze on Diluc. And when Diluc finally agrees to tell her what happened 3 years ago, I was screaming. Finally! But of course, before we get there, the manga makes one quick stop back in the present, because Kaya is getting increasingly suspicious of our young bandage friend, and he starts putting some real pressure on her. When it finally looks like things might come to a head, Amber naturally shows up right on time and scolds Kaya instead. God damn it, Amber. This is where the bandage girl finally tells us her name, Colette, and quietly slips the stolen notes back to Jean, under the excuse that she was just passing them along. Meanwhile, Kaya gets caught up in the group's findings and confirms that the strange combustion marks that were at the scene of the crime were the exact same kind that he also saw 3 years ago. And with that, the manga finally takes us to the good stuff. On the day of his 18th birthday, we see Diluc actually genuinely smiling. That is insanely jarring, as we only really know Diluc's smile from when he's putting on a facade. This version of Diluc is still whole. He's not yet become the cold, closed-off version we know him as from the game. After his birthday celebration, he and his father decide to head home together on a carriage. But on the way out, some random hooded guy in the crowd plants some kind of bug-looking thing on the wagon. Maybe some kind of tracking device or a sabotage tool, we don't really know. Then we get this really sweet but death flaggy moment of Diluc's father telling him how much he cares about him. And how proud he is. My dude is just begging for it at this point. He also looks at the weird glove-like device that we saw Diluc wearing earlier and mutters that he won't need it anymore. And then, almost right on cue, everything goes to hell. The wagon gets attacked by hilichurls, the guards are killed, and then Ursa the mother-flipping dragon even shows up. In the middle of the chaos, Diluc's father uses the same glove that his son was wearing earlier in the manga to unleash some of those black flames we've been hearing about, along with some very strong looking chains that bind down the dragon. And for a second, it looks like Diluc and his father might actually make it out. But then the beetle opens up, flashes in the dragon's eye, and somehow sends it in an even greater frenzy. Ursa breaks free and escapes, and after all that, when the fight is finally done, Diluc's father simply collapses, dead. And dude, this sequence hits hard, man. The knights show up, including Kaya, but it's just too late. And the chapter gives us this really haunting image of what seems to be Diluc's smile disappearing for the last time. And with that, his whole character just starts to click into place for me. The only thing I'm unsure of at this point is Diluc's hatred towards the knights. Like, is their being late to the party enough to make him hate them so badly? But as a whole, the way he carries himself in the game makes a lot of sense now. This isn't just a tragic event in his past, it's the moment where Diluc's whole worldview seems to shatter. And that's why I think this chapter is so important. It adds so much more to his character and his relationship with Kaya and Mondstadt as a whole. It's brutal, and I was glued to the screen when I was reading this. But Colette doesn't feel like this chapter has done enough yet. She also drops one more reveal, blurting out that Ursa didn't actually kill Diluc's father. Rather, it was his own power that backfired on him, which immediately just raises so many more questions. Was Colette somehow there? I mean, she's very young in the present day, but through the power of anime? Or is this just the insight of someone who has used the Black Flame herself? Either way, it's a hell of a note to end a really good chapter on. And by this point, I am just completely locked in. Bring on chapter 8. Thankfully, we are not done with the Diluc lore drops just yet. Because chapter 8 doesn't just continue his backstory, it finally explains why his hatred for the Knights of Favonius runs so deep. Right at the start, Colette tries to walk back what she said at the end of the last chapter, about Diluc's father being killed by his own power and all, claiming that she just spoke out of turn. Which, of course, Kaya doesn't believe for a single second. At the same time, we see that Lisa has basically come to the exact same conclusion on her own. So once again, the manga reminds us that Lisa is way smarter than she looks beneath all that. Diluc then explains that his real anger towards the Knights didn't just come from his father's death, it actually mostly came from what happened afterward. And that's where we get into a flashback from Amber's childhood memory. As a kid, she hid in her grandpa's closet and overheard a meeting between some Knights of Favonius and Diluc. And let me tell you, they are not exactly in there having a nice, respectful conversation. Instead, it becomes clear that the Knights intend to fully bury the truth. Diluc's father's role in defeating Ursa the Dragon will be hidden from the public. The real cause of his death will never be revealed. And the Knights themselves will be celebrated as hero who handled the crisis. Dick move, man. And suddenly, Diluc's hatred just fully clicks into place. This isn't just about grief anymore, this is about the fact that the organization he served and was a captain of for 4 years chose politics and self-preservation over truth, over honor and over the sacrifice of his father. They didn't just fail him, they erased what happened. And I think that makes this hit quite hard. We've seen hints before that the Knights aren't always the spotless good guys that they appear to be. In particular, I'm thinking of Diluc's story quest, where even here there's signs of bureaucracy and political maneuvering. But this is definitely the ugliest side we've seen of them so far. So when Diluc swears off the Knights forever here, it definitely feels earned. After that whole thing, the chapter switches back to Colette, who finally starts opening up a bit more. She tells the group about a friend of hers who was injected with something by the Fatui, and also says that the document Kaya is now holding may lead to a cure. Which is of course the most obvious asking for a friend story imaginable. I mean, even Kaya and Jean sees through it immediately. I mean, what kind of dingleberry wouldn't even notice that? Oh. Anyway, the group decides to send the ancient document to Sumeru, since not even Lisa can fully decipher the ancient language that's written on it. And from there, the chapter starts finally moving all of its pieces into place. When everyone returns to headquarters, Jean reveals that the Fatui will arrive in 3 days, under the excuse of investigating the Blackfire incident that killed their emissaries. But of course, no one really buys that. At this point, it's pretty obvious that whatever the Fatui are actually planning will probably come to a head when they arrive. On top of that, more of those weird beetle devices have been spotted around town. And to make things a bit more suspicious, the Ludi Hapastum festival is just about to start as well. The festival we saw in the prologue, just to be clear. So now the story has all these ingredients for chaos. A major public event, a city full of hidden weird devices, a traumatized girl seemingly tied to the Fatui, and an incoming diplomatic nightmare. Naturally, the gang now decides to finally team up fully, and split off on their own tasks to catch the culprit before things get out of hand. And that's where chapter 8 leaves us. This was another great chapter. Beyond giving us a more excellent Diluc backstory, this chapter also does an important bit of structural work. It deepens Colette's role in the story a bit more, and it sets the stage for what feels like the manga's first real climax. At this point, it's pretty obvious that something big is coming in chapter 9.